Hello, this is Rick from the Homesteader Store. Thank you for joining us today. This is another in our series of equipment for rookies. Today we'll be looking at a three-point. A three-point is an ingenious invention that is designed to set down and pick up an attachment in 4 different planes. It's important that you understand all 4 planes even though you may not use them, because they can go out of adjustment. This would cause a bad job by the attachment. It may cause damage to the attachment. So let's look at the three-point. This is a category 1 three-point. The lower pinhole here is 7/8 of an inch in diameter. The upper pinhole is 3/4 of an inch in diameter. These pins change with the category. Category 2 has an 1 1/8 pin down here, and it has an inch pin up here. Almost all attachments that most of us use are category 1 attachments. But it's important to only use those pins in those locations. Before we get into the 4 different planes and the 8 total movements, it's important for us to get a common vocabulary. So let's look at what things are called. This is called the lower link arm, and the lower link arm, as I said before, on a category 1 has a 7/8 pin in it. There are 2 of them. They do most of the heavy lifting. The stabilizing part of the three-point is the top link. And it does no lifting, it just stabilizes the front to keep it in the proper location to the lower link arms. The lower link arms are held in place by what are called stabilizers. These stabilizers in this case are turnbuckles, and others have telescoping stabilizers that have pins and slots in them. So we'll go through that in a few minutes. But again, it's very important to use the proper pins. This is a 7/8 pin, and this is a 3/4 inch pin. At times we see people using a 3/4 inch pin in the 7/8 hole. What this does is impact this rotating ball in the lower link arm, and it can actually impact load it and wear it very, very quickly. Now another part is actually the lifting part of the lower link arm. And you'll notice on this side there's a solid bar, and on this side there is another turnbuckle. Now we need to talk just a minute about turnbuckles, because in this case we have actually turnbuckles used in 3 different uses, 4 different locations. A turnbuckle is a very ingenious device that has on one side a left-hand thread and on the other side a right-hand thread. And when you turn the center part of a turnbuckle, you get a double movement of the amplitude of the pitch of the threads. So it's very quick in its adjustment. But it's very important when you adjust a turnbuckle, you adjust the center of it. Don't adjust just one side of it, because you will defeat the purpose of it, and it will often end up too short for the application. So when you turn a turnbuckle, you want to turn the center part of the turnbuckle to make sure that it comes out and goes in uniformly. So it's very easy to check. All you do is check to see if the threads on the bottom and the top are similar in distance. That will give you a properly adjusted turnbuckle. So for the first plane is vertical. So that gives you movements 1 and 2, up and down. That's the simplest. And how you adjust that is you actually use the lever, the lift arm. And this isn't what we call an index or graduated three-point. And you can move that and it will lower the lower link arms. And it has a stop on it that you can put to stop the movement of this lever, which will stop the amount of lowering of the three-point. Now, as long as we're up here, I'm going to show you one other thing that's very important that people often don't realize is there, and that is this adjustment right here. In almost all tractors, you'll find it underneath the seat. This is the speed at which the three-point goes down. The speed at which the three-point goes down is very, very important. Because if you have a grater blade or block scraper where you're doing repetitive movements, you don't want to wait a long time for that to get on the ground. So this adjustment is a restrictive orifice. So as you would turn it out, the fluid will flow faster, so it will come down. But now if you put a brush cutter on, or if you put a tiller on, you don't want that to come down near as fast. You want it to cut its way down or to till its way in. So then what you would do with this is you would turn this in, which has, in a sense, a needle valve that goes into the orifice that restricts the flow. So it slows it down. So this is a very important adjustment of the three-point that's not near the three-point that people don't realize is there. If you turn this in all the way, it will stop the movement of the 3-point. So if your 3-point stops working, the first thing you want to check is this adjustment that is underneath the seat in most tractors. So that is plane number 1, movements 1 and 2, that is up and down. And that is important for, especially for example, in a brush cutter, which you'll see in one of our other equipment for rookies. We have a whole video just on the adjustment of a brush cutter. So plane number 2 is the movement right to left. Now that is held in place, as we mentioned earlier, by the stabilizers. In this case, the stabilizer prevents the movement that direction. Then the one on the opposite side prevents it in this direction. The stabilizer adjustment is important because it changes from attachment to attachment. If you have a ground engagement attachment where something's in the ground, you want very little movement right to left on the lower link arms, and therefore you would keep your stabilizers fairly tight. If you have a brush cutter, for example, and we'll cover this in the brush cutter video, that brush cutter, you'd want a little bit more movement. I like to see that in case something's in the grass that's hidden, it will move the cutter over without damaging anything. Now what you absolutely do not want to do with this adjustment is that to do your hairpin corners at the end of the field with the attachment, a ground engagement attachment, a brush cutter, anything like that, down. Because these stabilizers will bend. They are not designed to withstand that kind of force when you are doing a hairpin corner. So go ahead, lift up your attachment, do your corner, then set your attachment back down. So in review, the stabilizers keep movement right to left. You want to be very careful that the stabilizer does not engage the tire. On some tractors like this one, the stabilizer, if not adjusted correctly, can engage the tire, and you'll see this from time to time that the corner of the tire are worn off because the stabilizer engages the tire. That's why when I adjust the turnbuckle, if it's a turnbuckle design, I like to see the turnbuckle vertical so it has less chance of hitting the tire. So what I want to do, if this stabilizer is hitting the tire, is to adjust the other side stabilizer tighter to keep it from coming over this far. But the stabilizers keep the attachment tracking square behind the tractor. And so that's what I want to do, is to look from the back and make sure that my attachment is tracking square with the tractor. Then the second check is to actually check the distance between the attachment and the tire on each side. Then if it's smaller on one side, I can loosen up one of the stabilizers and tighten the other one to get it to track square behind the tractor. So that is plane number 2 and movements 3 and 4. Now movements 5 and 6 is actually pitch right to left. This would be used if you wanted to use a box scraper, grater blade, to crown your driveway. You can actually lower this side, it will pivot over this point, and if you lower this side, then it will cut more on this side and more material will go to that side. So that is done with this turnbuckle here. This turnbuckle will raise and lower this lower link arm. If I want this side to cut more, I will lower this side, this turnbuckle, down. If I want it to cut on the opposite side, I will lift it up. Now what I would do is I would loosen this lock nut and I would turn this turnbuckle, which would raise and lower this. So that will give me a pitch right to left. So that is plane number 3. That is movements 5 and 6. Now movements 7 and 8, which is plane number 4, that is done with the top link. That will tilt your attachment, if you would in nautical terms, fore and aft. So that's very critical, for example, if you want to set a brush cutter. It's also critical if you want to set a grater blade or box scraper, because if you tip it forward just a little bit more, the grater blade or box scraper will actually take more material. If you tip it back, more material will slip underneath and you'll do a better job of smoothing. So that is done by adjusting this turnbuckle in and out. And notice there is another lock nut here. So this lock nut is important, as all the lock nuts are, to have snug when you're during operation, because that lock nut secures this from going out of adjustment. So I recommend, at least in this case, in this size tractor, a 10-inch adjustable wrench that will fit all the different lock nuts. On smaller tractors, a 10-inch is very, very good. If you go to a little bit bigger tractor, you need to go to a 12-inch. But what you want to make sure is not to over tighten your lock nuts so that you can get them loose if you want to adjust in the future. But this is something that's very important. You should be monitoring all of your adjustments while you're operating, because any of your attachments, except for a tool carrier, are in a big state of vibration all the time. So these can actually vibrate loose. So that's why I like to have the top link lock nut out on the outside so that it can be easily seen and watched during operation. But for example, with a tiller, you want that tiller to be straight up and down and enter straight so that its skid shoes will keep it going along square into the ground. So your fourth plane, movements 7 and 8, are done with the top link. So hopefully this has helped you in the use of a 3-point. The 4 different planes that you're going to deal with is the vertical one, that's done with the lever up in front. That's movements 1 and 2. Movements 3 and 4 is movements right to left. That is done with the stabilizers. Plane number 3, movements 5 and 6, is actually pitch right to left, which is done with the turnbuckles. And then the final plane, which is movements 7 and 8, which is done with the top link. So we hope this is helpful to you and that you can use to be more effective with your attachments and your tractor. So thank you for joining us again. I'm Rick from the Homesteader Store, another in our series of Equipment for Rookies.